Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. Perhaps one of the most interesting topics in Scripture is the discussion about the providence of God. And the reason it's interesting is because it ties into the redemption story of man, the omniscience and omnipotence of God, and how God blesses mankind. There are two main schools of thought when it comes to the providence of God that diverge from one another, and both cannot be right. One school of thought is that we live in a totally deterministic universe, where every choice, every thought, every action has already been predetermined, and that there is nothing anyone can do to stop it because God created it this way. This is the way believers in this believe that God can be without error and be able to tell the future. There is another school of thought, which, spoiler alert, I believe to be correct as we see from scriptures, and that's one where God created this universe and mankind with free will, and that our choices have not already been predetermined and can change based on circumstances. Now, in this type of universe, how can God be able to tell the future perfectly and without error? And my answer is, because God is God and we are not. But if we want to see a greater illustration of this, let's delve further into Psalm 105. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to the book of Psalms, to Psalm 105. We're going to be reading from verses 16 to 36. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Psalm 105, beginning at verse 16. Moreover, he called for a famine in the land. He destroyed all the provision of bread. He sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with fetters. He was laid in irons. Until the time that his word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested him. The king sent and released him. The ruler of the people let him go free. He made him a lord of his house and ruler of all his possessions, to bind his princes at his pleasure, and to teach his elders wisdom. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob dwelt in the land of Ham. He increased his people greatly, and made them stronger than their enemies. He turned their heart to hate his people, to deal craftily with his servants. He sent Moses his servant, and Aaron, whom he had chosen. They performed his signs among them, and wonders in the land of Ham. He sent darkness, and made it dark, and they did not rebel against his word. He turned their waters into blood and killed their fish. Their land abounded with frogs, even in the chambers of their kings. He spoke, and there came swarms of flies and lice in all their territory. He gave them hail for rain and flaming fire in their land. He struck their vines also and their fig trees, and splintered the trees of their territory. He spoke, and locusts came, young locusts without number, and ate up all the vegetation in their land, and devoured the fruit of their ground. He also destroyed all the firstborn in their land, the first of all their strength. We said in the last lesson that the author of this psalm is unknown. However, we know that he borrowed the first third of the psalm from David, for we studied it before in 1 Chronicles 16, verses 8 to 22. The whole point of this psalm was to show the eternal faithfulness of God. For David, when he was talking about the arrival of the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem, he focused himself on the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how the arrival of the Ark in Jerusalem was truly a time when God was with his people in the land that he gave them, in the city where he placed his name, fulfilling the land covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's not that God hadn't already fulfilled this covenant. It's that David saw a greater fulfillment in his time with the arrival of the ark in Jerusalem. The covenant between God and Abraham didn't end with David, though. It extended even to the psalmist's day, and so to show this, the psalmist wanted to show Israel how God fulfilled his covenant even past the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you recall back to Genesis 15, in verses 13 to 15, God said this. Then he said to Abram, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. and also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. God told Abraham there that his descendants wouldn't gain an inheritance in Canaan through Abraham and his descendants slowly gaining control of the land of Canaan. No, they would actually go down to another nation, serve that nation, God would judge that nation, and then bring Israel out and back to Canaan with great possessions. How did God accomplish this? Well, we know from Genesis that God sent a famine that actually moved Israel from Canaan to Egypt. Now, in numerous places in Psalm 105, this place is known as Ham, and that is because Egyptians are descendants of Ham. For Genesis 10, verse 6 says this: "The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan." If you read from the NIV or the ESV, you know that Mizraim is replaced with Egypt, as some manuscripts have Egypt instead of Mizraim. Thus, we can conclude that Mizraim and Egypt refer to the same person, which is why Ham is used in place of Egypt in some places of Psalm 105. Back to the famine, though. God didn't just willy-nilly send a famine. He prepared the way. Joseph was sent before the Israelites into Egypt. Joseph, though, didn't go willingly, for we know his brothers sold him as a slave. The Lord didn't tell Joseph initially why he allowed him to be sold as a slave, but Joseph would later come to realize God's plan many years later, and that how Joseph's faith was actually being tested, and that how, through Joseph's faith, God worked through Joseph to raise Joseph up into the house of Pharaoh in order to save God's people from the famine. The question is, did God cause the brothers to hate Joseph and then sell Joseph into Egypt? Well, James will teach us that God does not tempt us to sin, so that precludes God causing Joseph's brothers to sin. But this doesn't mean that when mankind sins, that God cannot use those free will choices to accomplish his will. In this instance, God's will could be accomplished any number of ways. But Joseph being sold as a slave is what actually happened, and so that's how God worked. He blessed Joseph throughout his stay in Egypt, even while in prison, and when the time was right and everything was in place, he did send a famine in order to bring the Israelites into Egypt to fulfill his prophecy to Abraham. But even while Israel was in Egypt, God didn't force the Egyptians to enslave Israel or treat them brutally. But God knew that they would because he knew the Egyptians. And because he knew the Egyptians, he also knew the type of leader he would have to raise up in order to judge them. A leader with a heart so hard that it would take 10 plagues for him to release Israel, plagues which Psalm 105 refers to. And even then, once Israel was released, this man's heart was hardened again. And so he chased Israel to the Red Sea before God parted the sea, allowing Israel to cross on dry land while destroying the Egyptian army. All of this was done not because God overrides man's free will, because God uses man's free will choices to bring about his purpose, and with God knowing man better than we know ourselves, because God is creator, God knows what man, when presented with different situations, will do. He can therefore act based on what he knows man will do. He knew what the Pharisees would do when presented with an opportunity to kill Jesus, just as he knew what Pharaoh would do when presented with the plagues of Egypt. God is never surprised. Therefore, the God of the Bible is much more powerful than the determinist believes, because God does not have to pre-write the script in order to be omniscient. He can be omniscient while still giving mankind free will choices and the ability to change. That's the God the psalmist served, a God who was completely faithful to the covenants he makes because he can bring about all of history in order to fulfill them. We'll conclude Psalm 105, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Psalm 105, verses 37 to 45, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.